By 0147 local time on July 22, 2026, a shift supervisor at the Wildberries regional distribution hub on the southern outskirts of Rostov-on-Don was doing what he always did at that hour: walking the loading dock, checking manifests, watching the conveyor lines tick over in the fluorescent quiet. The warehouse was enormous, nearly 40,000 square meters of shelving, sortation belts, and cold chain bays. Parcels moved through it around the clock. Shoes, electronics, kitchen appliances, children's clothes. The orange Wildberries logo was printed on everything. It was, by every visible measure, a place where people bought things. He had no idea what was already in the air above him. Somewhere north of the Azov coastline, a formation of Ukrainian long-range strike drones was already past the furthest Russian early warning radar line. They had been flying for more than 2 hours. Low, slow, quiet, designed to look like noise. This was not a symbolic attack. Ukraine's military intelligence had spent weeks building the targeting case for this strike, and when their officials spoke about it afterward, the language was precise. Wildberries' warehouses in Rostov and Krasnodar oblasts, they stated, had been documented receiving, staging, and redistributing military-designated goods under commercial cover. In a country where international sanctions had severed normal military procurement channels, the line between the largest e-commerce platform in Russia and the logistics backbone of its war machine had, according to Ukrainian intelligence, effectively ceased to exist. The fire that was about to start would burn for 11 hours. But the warehouse itself is not even the most important part of this story, because what Ukraine hit that night was not just a building full of parcels. It was the node where civilian infrastructure and military supply chain had merged so completely that destroying one meant destroying the other. Stay with this, because by the time we reach what happened in Krasnodar, 40 minutes later, you will understand exactly why Russian logistics planners are now facing a problem that money alone cannot solve. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand why a drone strike on an e-commerce warehouse is a legitimate act of economic warfare, you first need to understand what Wildberries actually is inside the Russian economy of 2026. Wildberries is Russia's largest online marketplace. It was founded in 2004, and by the time of this strike was valued at over $6 billion, processing roughly 4 million orders per day across 11 time zones. Before the full-scale invasion in 2022, it competed with Ozon and with international platforms. After sanctions closed Russia off from the global logistics ecosystem, its role changed. Amazon does not operate in Russia. DHL pulled out. FedEx pulled out. The international freight infrastructure that every modern economy runs on quietly withdrew. What filled the vacuum was domestic. Wildberries expanded. Its warehouse network grew. Its last-mile delivery fleet grew. And critically, its cross-docking infrastructure in the southern oblasts, the regions immediately adjacent to the war zone, grew fastest of all. Ukrainian military intelligence began tracking this expansion in late 2024. What their analysts found, according to Ukrainian officials who briefed domestic media in the weeks before this strike, was a pattern. Wildberries facilities in Rostov, Krasnodar, and Voronezh oblasts were receiving inbound freight that did not match the platform's consumer goods manifest. Military specification consumables, spare parts for vehicle systems, certain categories of communications equipment, none of it traveling under military paperwork, all of it moving through the same commercial sortation belts as shoes and kitchen appliances. The warehouse management systems logged it as retail cargo. The trucks that moved it were Wildberries delivery trucks. This is the dual-use logistics problem at its most operationally significant. Russia, under the weight of Western sanctions, had quietly restructured its military resupply in the southern theater to route through the only logistics network that still functioned at scale, the one that had orange branding and civilian cover. Ukraine's targeting decision was, by any reasonable reading of the law of armed conflict, grounded in documented military function. The warehouses had become genuine military objectives. The shift supervisor on the loading dock did not know any of this. He was checking a manifest for a consignment of kitchen appliances. He had 6 minutes left before the first impact. Russia's air defense coverage over Rostov-on-Don in July 2026 consisted of layered systems. At the outer ring, long-range S-400 Triumph batteries were responsible for detecting and engaging threats at distances of up to 400 kilometers. The S-400's 91N6E acquisition radar can track 300 targets simultaneously and guide up to 72 missiles in flight. It is on paper one of the most capable air defense systems ever built. On paper. The practical problem that Russian air defense crews had been confronting since mid-2024 was not a capability problem, it was a saturation problem. Ukrainian strike planners had spent 18 months studying the signature of what a real drone attack looked like on a Russian radar scope, and they had built their strike packages specifically to exploit the gap between what S-400 could theoretically engage and what a human crew could realistically process. The July 22 strike package, the exact composition of which Ukraine has not publicly confirmed, appears from OSINT tracking and subsequent Russian official statements to have consisted of multiple drone streams, approaching on different azimuths, at staggered altitudes between 50 and 300 meters, with a time-on-target spread designed to prevent any single battery from sequencing its engagement queue fast enough to address all tracks simultaneously. Here is what that looks like from inside the radar room. The S-400 crew at the Rostov battery had been at reduced manning since 02 o'clock hours. The graveyard shift. The radar scope showed sporadic low-altitude contacts, the kind of ground clutter and bird scatter that an operator learns, after months of practice, to filter. The problem with filtering is that filtering requires a decision, and every filtering decision is a moment when a real track can be logged as noise. The Ukrainian strike planners knew this. The timing, just before 02 o'clock local, was not accidental. What the duty operator was looking at, without knowing it, was the forward edge of a multi-axis drone approach already inside 80 kilometers. The tracks were real. They were moving with the slow, consistent velocity of propeller-driven fixed-wing drones, around 120 to 150 kilometers per hour. They did not maneuver aggressively. They did not emit targeting radar. They maintained their course and altitude with mechanical patience. The S-400's engagement doctrine is built around high-speed, maneuvering targets, ballistic re-entry vehicles, fighter aircraft, cruise missiles moving at transonic speeds, a slow drone at 80 meters altitude, maintaining a steady course, occupies a part of the radar envelope where the system's performance degrades significantly. Ground clutter at low altitude is a genuine masking problem. The S-400 is not optimized for it. The Pantsir S-1 short-range gun missile system, which should have been the second layer of defense, operates best at ranges between 1 and 20 kilometers. It is the last-ditch interceptor, not the early warning layer. There was, apparently, no coordinated early warning passed to the Pantsir batteries in time to matter. At 0153 local time, the first drone reached the outer perimeter fence of the Wildberries hub in Rostov. What happened in the next 40 seconds is reconstructed from the fire investigation, the statements of Russian emergency services, and the pattern of damage visible in footage that circulated on Telegram within 3 hours of the strike. The warehouse had a roof structure of metal sheeting over insulated panels, standard for large-format logistics facilities built in the 2010s. The drone impacted the eastern loading bay section. The initial fireball was confined. Then the sortation equipment caught. Conveyor belts, plastic sortation trays, the wiring looms of the automated handling system. Industrial-grade polymer components burn hot and produce dense black smoke. Within 4 minutes, the fire had crossed from the eastern bay into the main sorting hall. The suppression system, a standard wet pipe sprinkler installation, activated. Against a polymer fire moving that fast through that volume of space, it was insufficient. The shift supervisor got out. Russian emergency services confirmed later that there were injuries at this site. The number varied across official statements, ranging from 2 to 7. No fatalities were confirmed at the Rostov location in the initial reporting, though the situation was described as ongoing. The fire burned through the roof by 0220 local time. The thermal bloom was visible from orbit. 41 minutes after the Rostov strike, at approximately 0234 local time, a second strike hit a Wildberries logistics hub near Krasnodar. This facility was larger, Satellite imagery from commercial providers, analyzed by OSINT accounts within 24 hours, suggested the Krasnodar hub had a footprint of approximately 55,000 square meters, one of the largest single-site logistics facilities in southern Russia. It handled both consumer parcels and, according to Ukrainian intelligence, a substantial volume of the freight that did not appear on the consumer manifest. The second strike followed a similar pattern: multiple impact points, rapid fire spread through the sortation and storage areas. By 03:15, Russian emergency services had deployed multiple brigades to both sites simultaneously, a resource strain that complicated the response at each location. Russian officials initially said nothing. The Defense Ministry's morning briefing on July 26 did not mention either warehouse. This is standard practice. Acknowledging a successful strike on civilian-coded infrastructure creates a political problem that Russian information managers prefer to avoid for as long as possible. Wildberries issued a statement confirming the fires and describing them as the result of drone attacks. Russian social media filled with footage within hours. The silence from official channels lasted approximately 8 hours. By mid-afternoon Moscow time, the Rostov regional governor acknowledged the strike on his Telegram channel, describing it as a terrorist attack and confirming that emergency services were still working to contain the fire at the Rostov site. The Krasnodar site he did not mention. Now step back from the tactical picture and look at what this strike actually achieved, because the strategic logic is more significant than the immediate damage. Russia's military logistics in the southern theater have been operating under sanctions pressure since 2022. The formal military supply chain, the one that runs through the Ministry of Defense procurement system, functions, but it functions slowly, expensively, and with chronic shortfalls in exactly the categories of consumable and spare part that a sustained ground campaign burns through fastest. The gap is filled, in practice, by commercial channels. And the commercial channel that fills it most effectively in the southern oblasts is the one with the best warehouse network, the best cross-docking infrastructure, and the best last-mile delivery capability south of Moscow. Ukraine did not hit a brand. Ukraine hit a logistics node that its intelligence assessed as functionally integrated into Russian military resupply. Whether or not every parcel moving through those warehouses was military, the infrastructure itself, the sortation systems, the loading bays, the truck routing networks, the cold chain capacity, was dual use in the most operationally meaningful sense of the term. And this was the second strike on Wildberries infrastructure within weeks. The first, earlier in July, had hit a different facility in the same region. The pattern suggests a deliberate, sustained campaign against this specific logistics network, not a one-off strike of opportunity. The fires at both sites were still burning when Ukrainian officials made their public statement. The language was careful. They did not describe it as an attack on a commercial company. They described it as a strike on a military logistics node operating under commercial cover. They cited documented evidence of military-designated goods moving through the facilities. They said this was deliberate. They said it would continue. What Russia now faces is a calculation it has not had to make before in quite this form. Every major commercial logistics operator with infrastructure in the southern oblasts, in Rostov, Krasnodar, Voronezh, now has to assess whether its proximity to military supply chains makes it a target. That assessment changes behavior. Operators route around the southern oblasts. Freight takes longer paths. Cross-docking capacity disperses, becomes less efficient, costs more. The logistics friction that Ukraine is generating is not dramatic in any single instance. It compounds. In an economy already running at wartime strain, where every efficiency loss costs more than it would in peacetime, that compounding friction matters. The $6 billion valuation of Wildberries is not the point. The point is the 40,000 square meters of sortation capacity in Rostov that is now ash, and the 55,000 square meters in Krasnodar that burned beside it, and the question of where the freight that moved through those facilities goes next. Nobody has a clean answer to that question. That is the strategic effect Ukraine was purchasing. Watch for two things in the coming weeks. First, whether Ukrainian strikes continue to target commercial logistics infrastructure in the southern oblasts. If they do, it confirms a deliberate campaign doctrine, not opportunistic targeting. Second, watch whether Wildberries or other major Russian logistics operators begin relocating or restructuring their southern operations. A company rerouting its warehouses away from Rostov and Krasnodar is a company that has made the same assessment Ukraine's targeting cell made. It is a market signal that the dual-use logistics network in those regions is no longer considered safe. The shift supervisor who walked out of that loading dock at 0153 is somewhere in Rostov tonight. The building he worked in does not exist anymore in any functional sense. The orange logo is melted into the debris. And somewhere in a Ukrainian military intelligence facility, analysts are already looking at the next node in the network. If you want to understand this war as it unfolds, not the noise, but the strategy underneath the headlines, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, so you are there the moment the next chapter breaks. Hit the bell. And one final note for the record. This report is news analysis and reconstruction of ongoing, fast-moving events, built on reporting from major outlets and open-source intelligence, grounded in the facts as they are known at the time of writing. As the situation develops, details will change. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.